Good afternoon and welcome to the College of Continuing and Professional Studies webinar, Reignite Team Motivation. Thank you so much for joining us today. Next slide, please. It's a pleasure to have you all here this afternoon. My name is Shanta Bulai, and I'll be your moderator for today's webinar. If you have future questions about this webinar or other programs we offer, the college's contact information will be on the last slide of this presentation. So I am delighted to introduce the topic for today's webinar, Reignite Team Motivation. Your team members may have all the expertise in the world, but if they're not motivated, it's unlikely they'll achieve their true individual team or organizational potential. Motivation is a secret ingredient that energizes, maintains, and enhances team performance. A motivated team is more likely to maximize their discretionary efforts, which will lead to higher engagement and ultimately higher performance. In this webinar, you'll gain a clear understanding of what really drives team motivation when we describe types of motivation, identify common team motivators and demotivators, implement the most effective methods to reignite motivation on your team, and lastly, learn steps to maintain a motivational team climate. It's a pleasure to introduce the presenter for today's topic, Nan. Nan is an educator, speaker, and coach who aims to help people play well together. She has guided organizations through change management, resilience building, and conflict management for 20 years. Nan, thank you for being with us here today, and I'll hand it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Shanta. Welcome, everyone. It's always good to have all of you here with us. And we've got some slides for you to interact. We're going to do something new for me, and we're going to practice using something called Mentimeter because I want your input and thoughts before we get started. And so we'll start with a really simple question. Who's been on a team that's actually lost their motivation? Okay. Not surprising that the answers so far have been 100%. I think most of us have had some type of experience where we've been on a team that at some point they've lost some of their motivation. And I don't know about you, but it's a little more fun to be on a team that is motivated when I'm motivated, when my team members are motivated, and we're really working together effectively. And we're excited to be together as a team. Okay, so instead of dreading the time together, you're excited for it. And so it's important to think about how we can build team motivation. So we actually have a couple people who say no. So hooray for you. You're some of the lucky ones who've been on teams that have been motivated. My guess is I could put you on camera and you could help figure out how to teach this because there's some things you learned. I'm going to ask you another question, and it's going to take just a minute to open this one up. But what do you think contributed most to the decline in the motivation? And because there's so many people registered, I limited your responses to one. Interesting. I think the word that started the largest was leadership, and it's still sitting right there in the center along with burnout, change, communications, which we're going to talk about some of these things. When I look at this, though, we notice that leadership is in there maybe in different ways because I'll see it. And of course, it's hard to read because it's moving, but it says things, like poor leadership, bad leadership, the leaders leaving, having to do more with less, management. And so leadership has a big part of motivation, but we're going to talk about what each of us can do individually, what our team members can do. But a lot of the focus is going to be on management because they're the ones who sometimes drive the workload, the amount of change that people can handle. They're the ones who drive the communications. And ultimately, these things also impact burnout. So let's just do one more quick survey. And this is, what do you think would be the impact if we figured out how to reignite team motivation? So this is, I guess, in some ways, me asking, why are you here? What are you hoping will happen to your team if you take away some learnings today that you can go back and apply to your job today. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. If we can reignite team motivation, we are going to see individuals who have more job satisfaction. We're going to see individuals who are more productive. Your retention rates are going to go up. Your team is going to be more successful. They're going to be more engaged. You're going to see greater satisfaction. You're going to see less turnover. You're going to see less absenteeism. Okay. Research has actually proven that organizations who understand the value of motivation and work to engage and keep their team members motivated are actually in the top 21 percentile for profitability. Okay. And all of these things that are showing up here are items that impact profitability, because you're going to be more profitable when you have greater retention if you're hiring good people. Okay. Because you're going to have, more productive, happier people, more job satisfaction. All of those things all contribute to profitability of an organization. Okay. Thank you. I really appreciate you giving me your input using this. So I am going to take the slides down for a minute and just talk to you about some of the things that, when we're thinking about team motivation. I'm actually going to give you a quick story and get you to think about your own experiences. So team motivation, imagine that you're on a team that was given a really complex project to complete. It was so complex that senior management decided that they needed to put a hefty budget and a hefty timeline onto this project, because they figured that it would take at least 2, maybe even 3 attempts for the team, the design team, to get this project right because of the complexity. Well, the team actually exceeded management's expectations. They came in under budget, got the project done before the expected deadline and met all the spec requirements. And so the team was actually really excited because there was some budget left, on the back end. They were really feeling like they'd nailed this and were excited to work on the next phase of the project. So what do you think happened at the end of this project? Okay, if you want to maybe put some comments in the chat. What do you think happened at the end of the project when they nailed it? What should have happened at the end of the project? Yeah. More work should have been given to them. They should have celebrated, okay? They were really motivated and excited about the work they had done. They wanted to celebrate their success. They wanted recognition. They wanted acknowledgement. They wanted to work on the next part of the project. But does anybody want to venture a guess about what actually happened versus all the things that you've just put into the chat? Yeah. Nicole. Bingo, she hit it right on the head. They handed the project and the remaining budget over to another team. Okay. Not only did they do that, they didn't give the team members recognition. There was no celebration and there was no new project on the horizon. Okay. So what do you think happened to the team? Okay. It's not really in an ideal outcome. So if you were on a team, they were totally demotivated, totally demoralized. And as a result of that, Nicole, there you are. Nicole, it's like, again, you can come teach this with me. Actually, most of them ended up leaving the organization. And this is a true story. And this is from an organization that historically is known for having high compensation, typically high bonuses. They have a great leave policy. Okay. Typically, they are pretty good about recognition. They have all kinds of employee support programs. But what this tells you is that that's not enough. There needs to be some recognition for what people do and how they contribute to the team, because that's what builds the motivation. So at the end of all of this, they didn't feel respected. Okay. Yeah. And as it's Vanica make the comment, it's like, thanks, thanks for nothing. That's what it felt like. And so it puts people in a really difficult position. So I think we need to be thoughtful about what we as managers and team members do in order to make sure that our team members are really engaged and motivated in order to keep going. And so our job is to make sure that we provide those opportunities to build motivation on our teams. Okay. And I tell you this because Gallup has actually shown that it is actually 70% of motivation actually is management's responsibility, that they have the ability to impact the motivation of every team member. That's not to say that there aren't team members and that the organization doesn't have a role, but the largest role often does fall on the team leaders and the managers. And it falls on them because they are responsible. Oops, sorry, I must have taken my screen share down. They are responsible for them for building the relationships, because during this webinar, we're going to talk then about how managers and team leads can motivate each other, motivate their team members, how they can be motivation creating coaches versus motivation destroying bosses. And do you hear the differences in my comment there? Okay. Every relationship with your team lead and your supervisor has a huge impact on team motivation. People don't leave organizations, they tend to leave managers. Managers and team leads create the conditions that promote team motivation. And they need to do that. They need to understand what drives motivation. Okay. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that senior management doesn't play a huge role in this, because they're the ones who create the culture in your organizations. And sometimes that builds the culture on the teams, but every team gets to create their own culture on some level. And so it's really up to the managers to figure out how to do that. But it can be an uphill battle for the manager if they don't have the support from senior management. Okay, so when we think about motivation, what do you think are the key things that motivate individuals? And I see some of you are putting questions in the Q&A. I will be leaving time at the end for some Q&A. Yeah, I love what you're saying. It's meaningful work, feedback, recognition, opportunities. It's respect, feeling heard, satisfying work, okay, money. So all of you understand, so thank you for being here, even though you understand what some of the key motivators are. Most of the research will tell you that pay is rarely in the top 5, okay? Indeed just did a recent study, and they actually said the first thing has to do with the leadership style. It is about recognition and appreciation. It's helping your team members find meaning and purpose. And I love that. Willie just put a comment about agency. Yeah, giving them the ability to lead and have some control over what's going on. In fact, I think I'm going to drop something if I remember. I'll do it at some point. Dan Pink has a great video on mastery and autonomy that is really gives you a good perspective about about agency. And so that's a good one. So it's also about professional development. And so I'm actually part of what we're going to talk about here. What are some of the greatest ways to motivate, and get into some more specific? Yeah, hearing that your work matters, that's such a huge one. And a lot of times we don't think to have those conversations. Now, I am going to talk a little bit about just intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, because a lot of times when managers or team members think about motivation, they think about the extrinsic. They do think about pay raises, time off, bonus checks, trying to protect people from job losses, things like that. But the thing that really drives most people does tend to be that intrinsic motivation, that self-motivation. It's something that's internal. But unfortunately, a lot of times people make the assumption that they have no control over someone else's intrinsic motivation. And nothing could be further from the truth. Every team member, every manager has the ability to build trust, to build joy, to build motivation on their team, which impacts their, team members' intrinsic motivation. So I'm going to stop sharing for a minute, just for a couple of reasons, because I do want to drop in the chat, if I hopefully did that right. There is a link for Daniel Pink's video on purpose, mastery, and autonomy. It's been around for a number of years. It also speaks to agency, but it's a great video to help us recognize that really pay has so little to do with what keeps people motivated on the job. And so we have to think about what can we do in order to keep people engaged and motivated, and how we are going to help them be really productive. Okay. That when we think of a manager's job, they can really help with intrinsic motivation, because even if you have their responsibility is to help people feel good about the work they do. And a lot of this came out of the research. Google had a project called, it was called Project Aristotle. And Google spent a lot of time researching. And one of the things they talked about is that really it is about helping people be their best person, and remembering that your team members are human beings, not human doings. And if you've taken my other sessions, I've talked about that before. Where it gets tricky is that sometimes managers are like, hey, I've got motivated employees. I did a great job hiring those individuals. And if I've hired the right people, they just know what they need to do. And they are motivated themselves to do it because I hired internally motivated individuals. Okay. But just because you've got individuals who are internally motivated, internally driven, they like their work, they love their team members, they like their manager, they love the organization they work for, they feel motivated by the goals, that doesn't mean that they aren't interested in their manager or team's lead advice, assistance, and their advocacy to improve their performance and their progress in the organization. Okay. That oftentimes supervisors, we get so busy, supervisors and managers, that it's about delegating, not elevating our team members. And it isn't just about delegating. Our job is to figure out how to elevate them, because that elevation is what is so important to them. And the tricky thing about this is, as we know, every team member is very different. And so that means that we need to get to know each team member. And I'm going to talk specifically about how to make some of that happen. So there are really 7 habits that I often think of for managers in thinking about how to boost that intrinsic motivation. How do we do those things? Because you listed them, so you know what needs to be done, but sometimes it's what are the specific tactics to make them a reality. It's not enough to know what to do. It's thinking about specifically what are we going to do differently. So in order to make progress with our team members, and as I said, one of the members made the comment that making progress and finding small wins for your team members when they are doing work that is meaningful to them really will help them achieve mastery and purpose within the organization. But one of the things, if you listen closely, I said it's small wins. A lot of times we don't give recognition and feedback on projects until the very end. And depending on the organization and the type of people, some people don't give much feedback and recognition at all, because it's like, why should I give them any feedback when they're doing what they're supposed to do? Okay. And that's where that intrinsic motivation is lost. So imagine you work for a supervisor who completely leaves you alone because you're doing what you're supposed to do. But after a while, if you haven't had any feedback from them, you haven't been given a review from them, they don't ask you about your goals, after a while, you start to think they don't care about you. And if they don't care about you, you tend to lose some of your motivation about caring about them and their goals. So let's talk about what these the 7 different factors that I've got queued up for us to discuss today. So I'm going to share the screen again. And we're going to talk about the first factor really is about focusing them. Now, I know that most teams are given a project goal, okay? They have an objective. The task is the reason for the team. I mean, the team wouldn't exist if they didn't have a clear purpose. But what I would tell you is, does the team understand how what they're doing feeds into the larger vision of the organization? Do they know why they exist and the impact they make? I don't know about you, but I was on a committee once. I was on a team once, and I wasn't really sure why we existed. And I asked somebody one time, so if we disappeared tomorrow, who would care? And most everyone looked at me like, I don't know, because nobody was really sure how we were contributing to the larger vision of the organization. Okay. But the vision isn't just about the larger organizational vision. It's important to let a team focus themselves by creating their own vision or charter for themselves, not just what they want to accomplish as far as the task, but what do they want to accomplish as a team? Do they want to develop each other? Do they want to create change in the organization? Do they want to set an example for other teams on how to work effectively? And the value of these charters and the team vision statement isn't just the product that they deliver that guides them, but it's the conversations they have with each other to understand what motivates and drives each other on the team. And so while this may not necessarily feel like it's the team lead's responsibility, does the team lead or the supervisor, the person who put the team together, give the team sufficient time to really get to know each other and identify what their team charter and what their team objectives and goals are? Okay. Part of what they're doing is identifying their what. Think about it. It's what does success look like as a team and on the project? It's really like the GPS. Our GPS doesn't work unless we put a destination in there. It's where we're going, and for a team, it's what they're accomplishing. But that isn't necessarily enough. As you mentioned earlier in the chat, some of you said, it's about their why. Okay. Again, if each team member doesn't understand how their presence impacts the team, why they were selected to be on the team, what their special gifts are that contribute to the team, they tend to lose motivation and be less committed. Okay. Now, the mission and the purpose of the company, yes, can make your job feel important, but only if they see the direct connection. And we're going to talk about how that connection isn't just to the larger vision. It's really important to connect to their personal vision as well. But know that all of this work, if you've not hired people who fit the organization, that is the supervisor's job, is to find people who have consistent values or are committed to the vision of the organization. Because if we hire individuals who don't value the vision of the organization, when we don't have the right people, it makes it a lot harder to keep those individuals motivated. Now, with that, it's also important that these individuals, the focus also comes from making sure that you've got really clear goals. And you've probably heard about the SMART model. It's making sure that they've got clear, measurable goals. It goes back to the what. And it's not about how they do it. It's being clear about that measurable outcome, because you don't want to micromanage your team members. And so if they know what they're trying to accomplish, it's much easier to be successful. So can you give them very clear short-term and long-term measures that make it clear to them what they are trying to accomplish and what success looks like? But as you're going to see as we talk through this, it's not, again, telling them exactly how to do it, but it's stepping back and creating the space for them to do it. Okay. Now, part of the reason for having very specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely goals, both short and long term, is that, again, I made the comment, you want to create some quick wins on your team. When you have small, achievable goals that can be accomplished in a short time period, it's evidence of progress and success for your team members. So you want to start by identifying where are those opportunities that you can make sure that your team is successful so that you can create some momentum for them, okay? You need to work on finding these successes, because guess what? Without work achievement, you can't provide recognition. Okay. They are slightly different. You're giving recognition many times for the outcome and the accomplishment, but are they seeing progress along the way? And as a manager, it's really important for you to walk the talk, because if you are not walking the talk, it will not reinforce what you're trying to get people to do. So we've all had that where, managers say one thing, but they do something else. So I had a former student one time who she was actually going to college while she was working, and somehow or another, I don't even remember what the assignment was, but she mentioned that work-life balance was really important and that she was struggling because she had some vacations scheduled that she really wanted to take, but this was a major project and she didn't dare take the time. And I said to her that if she doesn't take her leave and she has committed to them work-life balance, what message is she sending to them when there are big projects that if you trust your people, if you've prepared your people, they should be able to handle it without her there at all times. And so she made the decision to take her vacation. And when she did take her vacation, she came back and her team members basically said that they had never felt more motivated, more trusted, and more valued than when she was gone, because they really felt she understood and prepared them for what they needed to do, because she had set very clear goals and objectives. And because she had done that and allowed them the flexibility to do it their way, they really felt the opportunity. They were really motivated because they could be more creative. They could really focus on what their why is, but because she had measures and objectives, it was easier for her to give recognition when she got back. Now, the second one then is that you have to know them as individuals. We don't necessarily want to treat our team members as just acquaintances. They aren't just cogs in the system. And I get, I've taught some of these sessions before and people have made the comment, well, how am I supposed to do that when I have 50 people on my team? It's not easy, but it is something that you still would like to strive to achieve, because getting to know your team members is a sign of respect. And when people don't feel respected, it's really hard for them to stay motivated, even when they are intrinsically motivated. Okay. As I said before, each team member is different. They have their own hopes, they have their own ambitions, and they have their own goals. And oftentimes we think our job is just to find meaning and to help them be successful on what their career goals are in our organization. But what the research is saying is that you need to find out what their why is, not just at work, but outside of work. I am not saying that you have to become their best friends. What I am saying is you have to create time to listen to what their hopes, dreams, and aspirations are on the job and off the job. Because when we get to know them and we know what's important to them, it's easier for us to identify what are the right developmental opportunities for them. What are the ways they like to celebrate success? What are the coaching opportunities that we can find for them? Okay. When is it relevant to give them feedback? Okay. So knowing them forces you to learn what their strengths are and figure out how also to put them in roles that help them be most successful. You know, when I was a bank regulator in a former life, crunching numbers in a boardroom and looking at board policy in the basement or in a boardroom, doing that analysis all day was not the best use of my talents. And luckily, somebody recognized that. And so when opportunities came up to be team members, team leads, team facilitators, they recognized that that was an opportunity that was good for me. But if it was good for me, it was also good for the organization because they knew who I was as a person. Okay. And it's not enough, though, just to know who they are. We need to go one step further and actually care about them. And this can sometimes be hard. A lot of times managers get promoted because they're very effective at doing the job. They've got really strong technical skills. But you also have to be really good at the people skills. You have to have emotional intelligence. And we've got some great webinars and classes through CCAPS. If you look at some of the former webinars we've done, we talk about those things. But knowing them is not enough if you don't care about them. And I'm going to give you 2 stories to demonstrate this, okay, that talk about the value of checking in versus checking on your team members. And I do have a slide on that later. But a number of years ago, and it was right after COVID, I was working for a supervisor, and I teach full-time at the University of Minnesota. And I'll be honest, during summer school, I didn't get very good ratings, but it was only 4 out of 24 students had filled out the evaluations. But the supervisor at the time basically said to me that, those ratings were unacceptable, which I agreed. I felt devastated by the poor ratings that I'd gotten. But they never asked me how I felt and what I thought about the situation. What they also never asked is what might have contributed to that, or if I understood what might have contributed to that. Because in the last 4 years, I had lost 5 very important people to me. I had lost my mother, I had lost my uncle, I had lost the man in my life who had been like the father, the uncle, the brother I'd never had. I'd lost a dear friend, and I lost my brother-in-law. And when I lost my brother-in-law, it was really hard on me. He was the last loss in those 4 years because it was like my parents were all gone. Okay. It was my siblings and their partners who were now passing. And it was really very traumatic. And I think all the grief had caught up with me. But they never asked. They didn't care what was going on in my personal life. And unfortunately, many times employees just don't take our personal lives and emotions and hang them on the door like our coat when we come into work every day. Okay. Yes, it's our job to figure that out. And I think I was doing the best that I could, but I struggled. Okay. For a while as I was working through some of the grief. Now, on the other hand, so I had a supervisor when I used to be a bank regulator, that when I was a bank regulator, we used to have to do these assessments on a regular basis. Like every 6 months, we would have to do some testing. And when we're doing some testing, hard to believe, but I maybe wasn't the highest scorer sometimes on some of the bank regulatory testing. There's a reason I don't do some of that work anymore. Okay, not to say that I wasn't good at certain aspects of it, but the supervisor who was responsible for the testing would pull me into her office and she'd be like, Nan, how do you think you did? And I'd be like, well, Jewel, I don't think I did very well. And she's like, well, you actually didn't do bad, but there were some questions I want to go over with you. I want to understand your thinking. And so instead of telling me that maybe I had failed the test, she said she wanted to understand my thinking. And she'd say, now, this question, Nan, help me understand how you got to that answer. And when I explained to her how I got that answer, every once in a while she'd nod her head and it'd be like, that's actually a pretty good answer, but it's wrong. Okay, according to the test, but that's a good answer. I understand how, now that you explained to me, you interpreted the situation, how you came up with that answer. She took the time to care about me and my progress and to figure out where I was getting lost. And as you know, Tanya just made the comment, it was like, yeah, understanding someone else's thinking is a powerful starting point. Okay. That people don't show up not to be successful. But the reason I talk about these two examples is the one supervisor was checking on me. The other one was checking in with me to see how I was doing. And there is such a big difference. Which supervisor do you think I'm willing to bend over backwards to do anything for, to bring that discretionary energy to work? Okay. It's going to be that second one. Now, the other thing about caring for your team members, and this is a big one, I spend more time on this point than I do the other ones, is partly because, it's not just about empathy. It's not about checking progress, but it's also dealing with the negative emotions that sometimes show up on our team. A lot of times as team members and as team leads, we just want to put a Band-Aid on it and put blinders on if our team members are experiencing grief or negative emotions, or even the team as a whole might be experiencing disappointment because they didn't do very well. Okay, they didn't meet their objectives, unlike that team that I talked about at the beginning. Our job as a supervisor is not to put a Band-Aid on those things and brush them under the table. It's to make it safe for our team members to talk about those disappointments. Okay, I sometimes laugh that to teach at the university, I have to be an educator and an expert in my field, and I have to be part therapist. A lot of 20-year-olds are dealing with a lot of stuff. And if I can't help them deal with that stuff, I can't figure out sometimes how to help them learn. Okay. And that's the same with our team members. And that's why our organizations have employee assistant programs. If an employee is really struggling, how do you help them? But sometimes people are just disappointed. I remember working with a team member. His name was Joe. And Joe, he would apply for jobs. He'd worked his way up to the top ranks, but Joe was always the bridesmaid. He was offered the opportunity to interview for high-level positions, but he never quite got the job. And so the conversation, with Joe was like, I hear that you're really disappointed in what's going on. And having that conversation, he's like, heck yeah, I am really disappointed. I'm frustrated. He says, I've spent years trying to get there and nobody can really tell me what's going on and why I haven't gotten there. And so then the comment is, I can see this is important to you. What are you willing to do differently? What energy are you willing to put in to make this change? And he and his supervisor agreed that he would go to some executive level training, but if the training didn't result in him moving up, that maybe it was time for him to move on because he was getting really frustrated. But they chose to use that energy and passion for him wanting to be better and his disappointment, using that disappointment to fuel energy to change. And a lot of times we don't want to talk about the disappointment that goes on, okay? Now, if a supervisor isn't respectful, sometimes we have to have a conversation and help them understand. So I just noticed that in the comment is that respect often is defined by the individual. So sometimes you just need to let the supervisor know what respect means to you and how you work best. And so sometimes it's letting your supervisor know, hey, really love my job, and I tend to be more successful when I get some reinforcing feedback on an ongoing basis. If I'm just told what I'm doing wrong, I sometimes get demotivated. So part of it is our job. We need to let them know occasionally. But we have the ability, if we care for people and we have a conversation, we can help channel their energy to help them be much more effective. Now, not only caring about them, then we need to actually free them from undue stress. Okay. It seems obvious, but we need to provide adequate resources. And it always seems that we're asking our team members to do more with less. And as a team lead, a team supervisor, sometimes we have to figure out how we can run interference to get them the resources they need. And if we can't get them all the resources, how can we maybe extend the deadlines on those projects? How can we create some flexibility in those projects? What other work can we take away, at least temporarily, for them to help them be successful? Because if employees are stressed out, if your team members are stressed out, they're going to have a hard time focusing on the task. Okay? And you're going to have to remember to remove barriers. And sometimes those barriers can be other team members who aren't meeting the expectations. Sometimes it can be barriers in the system. There can be policies or processes that are making it hard for your team to accomplish what they need to. And as a team leader, you need to figure out how to deal with some of those. You also have to learn to say no. I mean, if you have a successful team, guess what? Everyone wants a piece of that successful team. And somebody needs to say no, because you are going to stress them out, because we often reward our best team members by giving them what? More work. Okay, that's not the best way to reward a successful team, except, in the example I gave you at the beginning, where it was rewarding them with the next part of the project. Okay. We also have to deal with detractors. And when I say detractors, if there's conflict on the team, don't just let it linger. Somebody needs to deal with that, because, as I often say, the lowest common denominator is going to suck the life out of that team. So how do you deal with that lowest common denominator? How do you deal with what's detracting the team? And as I said, sometimes it can be conflict on the team where individuals just don't get along. And how do you figure out how to help them work through that conflict? Or how do you maybe replace somebody on the team, or how they can work more independently? And you have to be consistent in your communications. If you're finding things outside, in your other meetings about things that are going to impact the team, you need to let them know. Development is also really critical. This is a huge issue right now, especially for the Gen Z and the Gen Alpha. And the Gen Alpha are any employees born after 2000. These are the individuals where development is really important to them. They want the opportunity to have formal training, to build connections. They want some really honest feedback. They want coaching in order to be effective. And feedback there's the difference between feedback and coaching. And there's another session on feedback right after this, next month's session. I think Caroline's giving that on feedback. I'm sure it'll be phenomenal. But oftentimes feedback is reactive. It's focused on past performance. And you really want to coach individuals and get them to think about the advice and strategies that they need to achieve outstanding performance in the future. Okay. If you know their why and the team's why, how can you do that? Okay. I love the quotes there, and I'm missing it. So it's thinking about having these honest conversations. And so definitely sign up for next month's program, because that will talk a lot about feedback. And I already talked about the difference between trusting them, between checking in and checking on, but trust is a huge thing to people. And it gets back to that comment about respect, okay? That people do need agency. They do need autonomy. And this is why it's important to give them goals, measurable goals and outcomes, versus micromanaging them and telling them how to do things. Because if you have clear, measurable goals, you can give them some of that autonomy to try and reach those outcomes on their own. And the last one that I wanted to talk about is, how do you make sure that your team members are proud? They feel good about their work and their contribution to the team. Each team member and the team as a whole needs to know how they made someone else's lives better by the work that they have done. Okay. There's some great research. KPMG had a program. They're one of the big accounting firms, consulting firms, and they had a program about, and they actually have a philosophy about, what is the why? How do we contribute to the world? And so they were asking people to share their stories about how their jobs made a difference. And I think they originally wanted 100,000 stories, and they ended up with actually over 400,000 stories. I think they actually had more stories than they had employees, because when people were asked how they made a difference as an individual, it reminded them. So it was a story that managers could share with other team members, but it reminded those individuals why they showed up to work every day. And so what is their personal why? What is the pride they bring to the team? There's a really good example that fundraisers, none of us want those fundraisers who used to call us. Now we can block a lot of that on our phone. But it used to be, and colleges still do it. They call their alumni for fundraising, and a lot of times you just want to hang up. And it's not very, very motivating for these individuals to be hung up on, or for people to yell at them or say no. But they found that their motivation jumped significantly when those students got to meet some of the students who were actually getting the scholarships that they were raising money for. And so do you take the time to remind them how they, as a team, again, as an individual, are making a difference? Your job sometimes as the leader is to be the chief storyteller and to remind them of those stories and those successes along the way. So those are it. As I said, they're, small events can trigger huge reactions. Consistency is the key, making sure that we're interacting with our team members on an ongoing basis. And then hopefully we can chip away at that motivation. That I've given you some best practices to think about. As I've said before, you're not going to be able to do all of these. Think about what you might already be doing well and reinforce that, and maybe pick one thing that you think might have the most bang for the buck. If I change one thing, what might you do differently? Okay. It's your job to create those conditions to be successful. Yeah, I love that. Agnes just put a comment that, who did you help this week, or who helped you? I love that. Who helped you, to give the recognition to other team members. That is awesome. Yeah. So it is really hard as a supervisor to do all of this. Now, I do have a QR code here. This QR code will get you a couple of things. It will give you my contact information. I am asking for some feedback on the presentation. It helps me figure out how to be more successful. And there's also a question on there on what other topics would you like to see from CCAPS. If you take the time to fill this out, I have a one-page handout that gives you a summary of the 7 items, as well as some specific tactics for the 7 drivers that you'll get access to and that you can you can print out and keep as a result of participating in this. So I would appreciate that feedback, as would CCAPS, especially, like we said, what you're looking for going forward. With that, I would like to open it up. We've got about 10 minutes left. I know I have to leave some time for Shanta to do her things, but I want to make sure we talk about some questions, answer some questions that maybe I didn't pick up on. The last thing I just want to say is, do know that I teach several courses for CCAPS. Here are a few of the courses, or the courses that I primarily teach. I'd love to have you join me for one of those sessions live, where we can be a little more interactive and we can really dig into some of these skills at a deeper level.
Yes, and the college's link will be on the last page. So if you guys do want to look for Nan's classes specifically, it is listed there on the bottom of the page. So we will move on to questions now. I do want to say ahead of time, I apologize if we do not get to all of the questions. But our first question here from a listener is, how do you recommend getting to know your employees in a 100% remote environment?
Oh, that's a tricky one. And the thing is, with a remote environment, you really have to make a conscious effort in order to get to know your team.
Yes, absolutely.
And so you have to make a conscious effort in order to build that team. Sorry, I just think do you still see me in the slides? Did I?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So anyway, you have to make a conscious effort because we don't have those opportunities to bump into each other in the hallway, getting coffee, making coffee, before and after meetings. So do you build time? So the most effective organizations usually will have social events where they can either try to get people to come back live, or they have events like Friday afternoon coffee hour. Let's talk about what's going on. They build 10 minutes at the beginning of the meetings. They build time to reach out and have conversations with their team members. The things that just happen naturally when we're face to face, we have to schedule. And so it feels like more work, but it is extremely important work.
Right. So that leads in nicely to our next one. How should managers approach those employees who don't want to be known, don't want to share personal and strictly professional, let them alone attitude?
Yeah, as I said, we don't have to be their best friends, but we can ask them about what their aspirations are. Because when we ask them about what their aspirations are, they don't need to tell us how many kids they have and necessarily where they live and everything they like to do in their free time. But if we know what their career aspirations, and maybe even just asking, why do you work? What brings you the greatest joy outside of work? And how can we create those same type of opportunities in work that bring you joy on those hobbies?
Yes. And our next question, what kind of boundaries are healthy boundaries to work on checking in versus checking on? And how does one start if not comfortable?
Boundaries are really hard to set. That in itself is a whole nother
Sorry.
a whole nother class on, how to give boundaries. But again, a lot of it is, do you take time just to ask them, how did you feel about what's gone on in the last 6 months? How did you feel about your progress? Where would you like to continue to grow? What would you like to see changed? And so the conversations checking in is asking questions for them to answer, versus checking on is asking them, like, what did you accomplish? When is this going to get done? Why haven't you done that? Giving them maybe negative feedback versus reinforcing feedback. So it's shifting the purpose on some level of the conversation.
Okay. Great. And our next is, how do you balance compassion for an individual situation with holding everyone accountable to the same standards or equity within the team?
That's always tricky, because what I often say, fair does not mean equal. Okay. When you're working with a team, that if your team members know and respect each other, if they know something about each other on a personal level, if people feel safe, they understand that sometimes concessions need to be made. And if we have to make concessions and people need to know why the concessions are made, or they want to know why the concessions are made, you need to explain at a high level, without getting into the personal details, what the exceptions are and why they were made this time. And it may be a discussion about whether we would make this concession going forward or not, or whether we need to change the policy. So I was just dealing that my daughter just had a situation similar to that she was denied something that she wanted a concession on, but afterwards, the organization she works for actually changed their policy because they recognized that they probably should have made the concession and hadn't considered that scenario when they put the policy into place.
Okay. Let's see. I have a few others here. How do you give your supervisor feedback of the importance of relationships when they don't value or see the importance of them?
As I said, part of it is just speaking specifically to your need. And so if you have a supervisor who doesn't really know you as an individual, and this is actually an interesting dynamic because I see it on teams pretty frequently when I work with teams, in that you have the individual that it is. It's just all about the work. You just do the work and that's all you have to do. And some team members are like, yeah, but I can't work with you unless I know who you are and you know who I am, because you can't leverage our strengths and I don't know what your preferences are and things like that. And so it's having that conversation. It's just, as I said before, hey, I'd like to talk to you about how I show up and how I tend to be most effective. So sometimes when I'm working with groups, we do something called a user's manual. And it's just letting a supervisor know, this is how I prefer feedback. This is how I prefer to be communicated with, or I'm most motivated when this happens during a team meeting, or I'm more likely to contribute if this happens. And so it's speaking specifically to your needs, wants, and interests, and presenting it in a way that makes it clear that when those things happen, you perform differently. And if you have examples, that's really useful.
Seems like that also applies to the question about setting boundaries, because you're still putting yourself, what you value out there. So we have a few comments. If you could go back to your QR code for the survey. And also I did add the link in the chat for the slide deck. So you can also find that in the slide deck, which will also be sent following this presentation, for you to add any of your comments in that for Nan. But with that, I will go on to the last slide. Sorry, Nan.
Want me to the last slide? Here we
go. Yes, please.
We're coordinating here.
Second to last. Yeah, so this one is good. Great. So as I mentioned earlier, we will send a link to the webinar recording within a week of the webinar. Also, the QR code is here, which is our CCAP's webinar archive, where you can see all of our past webinars, including Nan's presentations and a few of our other instructors. And if you do want to dive deeper and want to check out some classes, our CCAP's website is there at the bottom. And this is for UMN employee well-being points. So unfortunately, this is just for UMN employees, but if you have questions about that, you can follow the link there and fill out for the points for being here at our presentation today. So thank you again, everyone. And thank you, Nan, for joining us today. I hope you all have a wonderful afternoon.